Hey everyone, welcome back to Elevate Your AIQ, your home for insightful conversations on human-centric AI readiness, talent transformation, and the future of work. This is Bob Pulver, and today's distinguished guest is Melissa Reeve. She's the founder of Hyperadaptive Solutions and author of the upcoming book, Hyperadaptive, Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native, available for pre-order now. Melissa's path to this work is anything but linear, from lean manufacturing on a factory floor in Tokyo to agile and DevOps transformation to marketing leadership, a journey that perfectly mirrors the systems thinking mindset at the heart of her methodology. Together, we explore how organizations can transform not just their technology, but their people, processes, and mindsets to truly become AI native, why taking a human-centric approach is the only sustainable path forward. If you've ever wondered how your organization can navigate AI transformation without leaving your people behind, this conversation is for you. Thanks so much for tuning in. Now let's go chat with Melissa. Hey everyone, it's Bob Pulver. Welcome back to Elevate Your AIQ. Today, I am very excited to talk to Melissa Reeve. How are you today, Melissa?
I'm doing great. So excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad we finally made this happen because I know we had some fits and starts recently, but I'm really excited to dig into all the great work that you've been doing around hyperadaptive. I feel like it's so incredibly closely aligned to all the work that I've been doing with Elevate Your AIQ and making sure that people are ready and sort of going through their own AI literacy and their own transformation, not just with skills and tools, but their mindsets and how they really think about what's needed in, a modern, transformation. And so before we dig into all of that, I thought you could just give my listeners a little bit of your interesting backstory from, your lean manufacturing experience overseas to marketing leadership roles and agile and DevOps and all these, great experiences that you've had that culminate in the impetus for hyperadaptive. So I'll let you explain your background.
Yeah, thanks for that overview. And you've nailed it. It's an unconventional background, right? It started on a factory floor in Tokyo where it was the Hino Motor Company. And I was seeing the Toyota production system, which is kind of the roots of Lean, Six Sigma, all that goodness, in action. And it was an industrial engineering course in the 1990s. And I feel like that was the foundation of what hyperadaptive has become. After that, I moved into being a marketing executive for 25 years. And even though I was in marketing, my mindset was that of a systems thinker. It was that of somebody who looks at the whole and sees how a change in one area can really impact the other. And so when I came across a white paper by a gentleman named Jim Ewell, who in the future became my business partner in 2011, describing agile marketing, I was all in. And then I moved into an organization called Scaled Agile. It was located here in Boulder, Colorado. And what was so magical about working for them, they were the providers of something called SAFe, which is the Scaled Agile framework. But they brought together just the world's foremost thinkers in things like DevOps, TQM, enterprise transformation. How do you change management? I learned all about John Kotter and Peter Senge. And when AI hit, I was running the Agile Marketing Alliance. And of course, AI hit marketing very, very early. And it just sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Nobody wanted to talk about Agile anymore. They wanted to talk about AI. So I was in denial for about 6 months before I said, okay, maybe I'll lean into this AI thing. And as soon as I did, it became clear to me that this was going to be the next transformation. This was, even though everybody was talking about the technology, I really dug into the people, the processes, and the roles. And I spent about 18 months researching the book, not only integrating everything I knew about change management and transformation, but also surfacing best practices from organizations around the world.
Yeah, amazing. And there's so many threads I could pull on that background. I mean, just thinking back to my early IBM days where I was doing what we used to call process reengineering, what we would call it, transformation now. And certainly we're both systems thinkers. So that's another thing we have in common. And also just the nonlinear sort of career and finding not just transferable skills, but finding ways to think about how to take concepts and methodologies from one area and seeing how it can relate to other areas, even if that means something that's completely out of your comfort zone. But, you take that learning mindset and you say, here are some things that could apply from different industries to new industries or from different domains within an organization and apply them elsewhere. And so I think as AI matures, we're still going to need humans like us to put those pieces together and be that connective tissue in a way.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great point.
As we talk about hyperadaptive, and I know you've got the term AI native in your book title as well. And so I thought we could unpack those terms a little bit and why they're so critical to the future of work.
Yeah, and I've been asked it a lot, and I do mean something very specific when I say AI native. And it is these organizations when you're who are growing up in this environment now. And what that means is that when you look at their people, their processes, the roles, and even the technology, that those are the people, the processes, and roles are being developed in lockstep with the technology. So that means that they can leverage and harness the power of that technology from the get-go. And what we're already seeing is that the way those organizations are structured, their organizational models are pretty different than a traditional organization. They're not necessarily organizing around functional silos. They're not necessarily organizing with a lot of handoffs and delays that we see in traditional organizations. They're agent first. They're technology first. And the people in the processes and roles really bend to that. And I contrast that with what I call a linear organization. So when you think of a large organization, a global enterprise, what have you, you mentioned IBM. What I think about is strategy to execution along one axis and concept to delivery along another axis. And you think about all the layers of the hierarchy that something has to go through in a linear organization. And you think about all of the handoffs and delays that happen from concept to delivery. And AI native organizations just compress both of those dimensions.
Yeah, really interesting. And so I like your point around elevating the people and the literacy and the comfort as you advance the technological capabilities and as you think about who or what should do this particular task or activity. And as we think about redesigning, roles, obviously that's critical. But I think that's important context as you think about not allowing people to fall behind or making sure that you take this sort of human-centric approach, which I know we'll talk more about, but how you really think about the people part of this complex equation and how you think about putting all the pieces together.
Yeah, so when I think about those linear organizations and I think about the shift that has to happen if you're an IBM or you're even an Accenture or something like that, and you're trying to make this shift to become more AI native, the advantage of these large organizations is they generally have deep war chests, right? So what that buys them is that buys them some time. And these AI native organizations are figuring things out. So it's not like they can just scale overnight. So the question becomes, how do you rewire your organization from this linear mindset into this more AI native mindset? And it really is about doing it gradually. I see so many organizations that are just impatient, right? They want to orchestrate right away. They want to become AI native right away. And you're turning an aircraft carrier around. It doesn't navigate in the same way as a jet ski. And so you've got to do it step by step. And to your point, you've got to bring the people along. And so the question becomes, what kind of support can you offer up your people in your organization to help them as they're turning this aircraft carrier around? And I know we're going to dive into that more.
No, I'm glad you added clarity to that because there's a lot of terminology that gets thrown around. I mean, I myself sometimes kind of bounce back and forth between AI readiness, which is like you're never ready. You should just jump in and figure it out. And then there's, a maturity scale as well, right? Like how are we advancing our thinking as well as our, hands to keyboard, skills, or our, agent and assistant, interaction, starting to build some of these assistants, starting to learn how to build it responsibly, of course, which I know we'll talk about, and really just becoming more comfortable and understanding where to draw the line in terms of, whether it's ethics or it's some other type of decision making, where you say, well, we still need human judgment, we still need critical thinking, we still need all these things in certain places. And so different organizations, depending on where they are on the maturity scale and where their sort of culture is at, those lines may be in a different spot.
Yeah, for sure.
I know you've spent a lot of time with organizations and talking to folks about some of these headline grabbing things around, most AI projects are failing and things like that. And so where do you think, I believe stumbling is a term that you would be familiar with, right? Like where are people getting this wrong? I mean, is it simply they're focusing on the technology and not on the people and the cultural behavioral aspects of it? I'm sure it's more nuanced than that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the number one thing that people are missing is this lack of what I call support structures. So when you think back to putting the PC on everybody's desk in the 1990s, and I think you and I are of an age where we actually lived through that, we didn't just put a PC on the desk and say, go have fun. And I think that's the biggest mistake that people are making is when we did that, we spun up IT help desks. We spun up entire IT departments. And the analogy that I use, in addition to the PC, is the piano. Like a piano is easy to use. You can dink around on the keys all day, but it's not really easy to learn. And so what we need to do is we need to start spinning up more support for the humans to move everybody along. Because what we're seeing is what I call this bifurcation. We're seeing 10, 15% of the people who are naturally curious, who are willing to learn AI on their own time, and they're leaning into the technology. And they got a PC that was put on their desk and they're like, all right, let me try and figure this out. And then you have the rest of the organization. And the rest of the organization is really lost. They don't have the time. They're so busy just keeping the day-to-day running to figure out this magical new thing called AI that's landed in their laps. And so what we need to do is start thinking programmatically about our AI transformations. And in the book, Hyperadaptive, I start to articulate what these support structures look like. In the foundation stage, I won't go through them all, but I'll just give you a taste of them. So in the foundation stage, we might be talking about AI councils and AI leads. And your listeners might be saying, oh, yeah, we have that covered. And I'd love to push back on that and say, well, do you have dynamic governance? Is it cross-functional? Do you have layers of governance? On the AI leads front, how are you programmatically supporting your AI leads? Are you just anointing people AI leads and then not unlocking their value as change agents? How are you continually updating your AI leads, your practitioners? Because I tell you what, it's a 24/7 job. I mean, I can barely keep up with all the advancements, and I do it full time. And so again, how are you programmatically installing AI into your organization?
I've heard you mention things around, like these AI activation hubs that you've observed in some organizations, or these impact hubs. And I agree with you wholeheartedly on both of those, as well as like these social learning opportunities. I think there's tons of opportunities for mentorship and reverse mentorship, as leaders may not be keeping up because they have perhaps even less time than others, with a job and, managerial responsibilities and things like that. And so these are lessons that, we went through, again, going back to my IBM days when the internet came about and social media came about, and we had to sort of adapt and say, what's the right sort of behavior? How does this, get incorporated into the flow of work? How is this productive and not a distraction? Really trying to understand I guess, the return on some of the investment of our time and attention in some of these tools. And so we are going through that again, but at a much greater scale and greater speed.
The question becomes not only how do you change? And the challenge that I have with the word change is it implies a point in time, right? Like, oh, I changed. But AI is going to be much more like fitness or eating healthy. It's going to be something that you have to continually do. And so the question becomes is how do you create new support structures within the organization to support that always on capability? And so you mentioned, for example, the AI activation hubs. And in the hyperadaptive model, so this is a 5-stage model where you go from the foundation stage, which is the first stage, into integrating AI into your workflows, to agentic AI, to scaling agents, to a state of hyperadaptivity where you can continually sense and respond to the changing environment around you through orchestrated value streams and through always on learning. So that's quite a journey. And when you're in those early stages, you want to spin up what I call these AI activation hubs. And think of them as a network of centers of excellence in your organization. And their role is to continually monitor AI. So let's just say that, like, recently Claude 4.6 just dropped. We were talking about it before the show. Amazing capabilities. And you don't actually want everybody in your organization spending their time figuring out what those capabilities are. So it's the task of this AI activation hub to keep track of that and then atomize that learning in order to spread it out to your AI leads who then put it in the hands of practitioners. And so if you think about this network, you might have an activation hub in legal, you might have one or more in finance. And they're really saying, okay, given what I know about what we're doing with AI and finance, let me figure out what the implication of this new capability is for our teams. And in that way, you're getting these efficiencies that most organizations aren't getting right now. They're just they're spreading. They're not essentially organized around keeping on top of AI. And I think that's the shift that needs to happen in these enterprises.
I don't know if there's a centralized, is it like a hub and spoke where there is a centralized group? Is that the AI, governance council and those folks? But I agree, you've got to have that those hubs in the different domain areas, right? Because we're going to start to see a lot of vertical solutions, or people are going to be building solutions that solve specific problems within a particular domain. And it also feeds into the ability to sort of personalize or at least customize some of the learning and some of the actual interactions and skills that you need within those domains. Because to your original point, not everyone needs to know everything, and we certainly don't need to be distracted by, what model does what. I mean, you get decision fatigue on top of there's just too much to try to consume. So,
Hey, I'm Katie Van Horn.
And I'm Jackie Clayton.
We're your hosts of the Inclusive AF podcast, where we take on DEI, leadership, and HR without all the corporate fluff.
That's right. We've got decades of experience, a lot of opinions, and zero tolerance for performative anything.
Every week, we dig into what it really takes to build inclusive workplaces with honesty, strategy, and a few side eyes.
We'll talk about the tough stuff, power dynamics, privilege, what's broken in the system, and how we can all do better.
And don't worry, it's not all heavy. We bring receipts, laughs, and real talk from people actually doing the work.
Think of it as your weekly dose of truth, tips, and a little tea to help you lead with intention and show up for your people.
So if you're ready to push past the buzzwords and get into the actual work of inclusion,
you're in the right place. So subscribe to the Inclusive AF podcast.
New episodes drop every week.
Catch us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We'll be here breaking it down one inclusive convo at a time.
So just, is it really a hub and spoke? Is there a central, team with the cognitive diversity to sort of assess, these are the right things for the organization at large?
So I'd say it's both and. So you have to think about these different what I call support structures interacting. So let's go back to governance because you were hinting at
Yeah.
that. And how I see governance playing out is you might have a centralized cross-functional group who is meeting much more frequently than the typical governance committee, maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every month. And they are, say, setting the general guardrails. You probably need another layer at the functional level who's interpreting those guardrails. Finance deals with a lot of data, marketing deals with a lot of data. They're interpreting that for their particular context. And then I see the AI leads being the frontline guardians of those guardrails on their teams, helping to interpret their functional guardrails on the front line. And then you might even create a governance GPT, right? So that if I'm an individual and I want to do something with AI and the data, and I'm not quite sure what the guardrails are, I can just simply query this, and that can be continuously updated. So I'm confident that I've got the most up-to-date information. So you've got these governance structures that are then interacting with, say, your network of AI activation hubs. And the AI activation hubs might take that and say, hey, it seems like a lot of people are getting stuck around this particular piece of governance. They're feeding that back up to the central. The network of these hubs are communicating with each other. And then another layer is think about your AI leads, and they might form their own communities of practice. So I think it's a little more dynamic than just a strict hub and spoke model. So I would say it's both and the goal is to create enough connection points between these different layers and levels and groups that we've got a continuous flow of information going through the organization.
So there's some level of autonomy as well in those pockets, right? Because they might know what those guardrails need to be. They might know the appropriate, use case. They might be able to help, balance the human plus AI kind of, relationship, right? Because it's not necessarily a 50-50 kind of, synergy. I mean, it just really depends on the context and the domain and the tasks and activities that need to be accomplished, and potentially the human impact and any, compliance and other types of governance and risks that need to be incorporated within those domains.
Yeah, I mean, what we learned from Agile and scaling Agile is the importance of cadence and synchronization. So you think about all these parts and pieces that we've described, right? The AI activation hubs, your AI leads, the governance, and having regular synchronization points that are very predictable allow the learning to surface. And so just being very deliberate about these structures, about how they intersect and interact with each other, I think allows them from getting too siloed, keeps the learning flowing rather than locked in their local context. And I think that's the other key piece that I'd love to highlight for your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we think about this sort of evolving, human plus AI, relationship and all these sort of macro, topics that people need to think about and are probably struggling with, to be honest, how do you think people are doing in terms of maybe it's a maturity question, right? Like, where are they on the way to being, hyperadaptive, if that's sort of, I don't know if you could call that a North Star, or it's just the journey itself, or how you typically frame it. But I wonder, there's so much, fear and uncertainty right now. And I guess I'm curious about your feeling about where we are, right? Where most organizations are right now here in, early 2026.
Yeah, I mean, some days, Bob, I feel really naive. And here's why I feel naive. Because the headlines are just screaming jobs are going away. and, the doom and gloom and agents are going to take over everything. And that's the prevailing narrative. And I say I feel naive because I just don't believe it. And I don't believe it because we've automated things before. We've gone through factory automation, and we know that 34% of the world's factories, there's non-automatable tasks. Only 1% of the factories in the world are fully automated. And then I take a look at DevOps, which is the automation of the software delivery pipeline. We used to have people who wrote the code, then tested the code, and then did multiple levels of testing and then pushed it into production. And what DevOps does is it automates that so that leading organizations like Amazon are deploying 23,000 times a day. What we saw in those shifts, and don't get me wrong, certain positions went away. So I'm not saying that there won't be some positions going away. The World Economic Forum indicates that there will be 93 million new jobs created with AI. And so what we've seen in those previous evolutions is that people go from doing the task to building, monitoring, and maintaining the AI that does the task. And so I think that's the piece that I would love to see amplified more in the narrative is, where do these jobs start to go? What new roles are created? How do we start to prepare for those new roles rather than just focusing so heavily on the jobs are going away?
I also think one of the things that is grabbing a lot of headlines, or at least it did over the last, 18 months, 24 months, is what I consider a vanity metric, which is individual productivity. It's like, our average so-and-so is, 40% more productive, or, whatever it is. And that really is not, you can't take that and then just make an assumption that the organization is that much more effective. I mean, I've talked about that countless times on this show and elsewhere. And there was a great Substack post from someone at Andreessen Horowitz just this week that talked about this in great detail about, and it ties to my comment earlier about this, the necessity of humans as this connective tissue between, a bunch of, agents and agentic workflows. And so I just feel like that's just feeding into people, not necessarily on the job loss fears, but just the pace, the overwhelming and seemingly accelerating pace of change and what AI is becoming capable of. And I think that's just feeding into the fears. But at the end of the day, and we've seen, survey and research evidence of this, that does not at all translate into how effective teams have become and how this has changed the revenue generation of or other success metrics for the organization at large.
Yeah, and I'd like to address that on a couple of different levels. One is on the organizational level. Every organization that I've belonged to, if you think of like what they aspire to do as the sun and what they actually are able to do as the earth, because we're constrained by budget and time and capability, any organization I've been part of only is able to accomplish a fraction of what they really want to accomplish. And so the question becomes, does AI unlock additional capabilities? Maybe it's the size of Jupiter that now the organization can do. And that's why I feel like it's so short-sighted for someone like Jack Dorsey to lay off half of his staff. I mean, you've got a software company and you're laying off half of your staff. Is that a productivity gain, or are you shortchanging your mission? Do you need to reinvent your mission as a software company to become something else? How are you servicing your customer, and how could you be doing that better? So I feel like organizationally, the leading organizations unlock new capabilities and fulfill a more aggressive mission. I think Moderna is great. They said, with AI, we want to deliver 15 new drugs to market in 5 years, when reality is that generally a pharmaceutical company can take 10 years to deliver one new drug. Like imagine what kind of pressure that puts on the other companies in the market. Is Pfizer going to cut now half of its workforce when they've got Moderna out there leading the way like that? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
I did think it was a bit short-sighted, but part of it is current incentives, right? Like how are you incentivized? And is it just shareholder value, or can you do a better job thinking about all those things that aren't getting done? One of your points about, what else could we be working on if we freed up this capacity? And what else are people capable of? Going back to the human centricity point and human potential, what else could these folks be doing? Because you are not your current job title, right? You're a lot more than that. And as you and I both know from having these nonlinear careers, if someone just said, "Oh, you're a CMO or you're a product manager or whatever," like that's just one slice of who I am and what I'm capable of. So what else could you do if you were to unleash the capacity and the potential, not to mention the institutional knowledge and the relationships that people have? I just think this is all part of, what I've been describing loosely as this connective tissue. I mean, we are not just cogs in the machine. And if you treat us that way, it's going to have long-term, downstream, implications.
Absolutely. AI absolutely changes who can do what. And there's this term adjacent competencies that all of us, it's maybe you think about as your T skills, right? We're deep in one area and then we have these adjacent competencies. And AI is helping to unlock those adjacent competencies. And really, that's where the innovation is we've kind of innovated the heck out of marketing, right? But when you overlay marketing and product development, or there's these software developers who are now moving into product, there's these finance people who are moving into software. And when we get that overlay is when these new breakthroughs start to emerge. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that as people unlock their interests. You've got somebody who is a musician on the side, and now they've got AI and they're a product manager. Like, what can that person create? And so absolutely, I think you're right on. And there was a recent article by Harvard in the HBR who that outlined what was happening at the individual level. And I think you hinted at it, which is at the individual level, things are getting more intense. And what this research revealed is that it was getting more intense because people were trying to do more. All of a sudden in my day-to-day work, I'm not only doing everything that was asked, but I'm kind of stretching and pushing at the edges and saying, well, maybe I could do that too. This thing that I used to have to wait on finance or legal, or whatever it was for weeks. Maybe I could get a head start on that. And as a result, workloads are increasing. And then there was this other term that was continuous partial completion. And I loved that phrase because everybody I talk to, and you're smiling here, everybody I talk to who's knee deep in AI, we feel it, right? Like we start a chat. And I think even before this conversation, you were like, oh yeah, I just told Claude to hang on. I'll pick this up later. That's continuous partial completion. And that's what's making it so intense.
I feel like that describes my whole professional career, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I also think, well, two things. One is what you just described kind of ties to this, what I've described as like this sort of reinvestment dilemma. Like now that you've freed up this capacity, what do you do with it, and who gets to decide what you do with it? Is the organization going to just give you more work? Are you the kind of person that is going to continuously learn and want to take on more work, and therefore you're filling your bucket, you're overfilling your bucket, on your own, and that's something that you need to, contend with. But we can't just allow AI to just put more on our plate, because that has its own limitations and problems, because you could ostensibly be just exacerbating, the burnout and the overwhelm that people have already experienced over the last 6 years. Actually, 6 years to the day was the last day I was in an office Friday, March 13th, 2020 was when I got kicked out of 30 Rock and I was working at NBC. Never to return, at least not as an employee. But I think, these are all difficult, questions that people need to grapple with. But I do think that it's why I've been focused so much on this human-centric lens, because we have to understand the societal implications, the implications that will ripple across the entire talent, ecosystem if we don't understand what it's going to take to keep people sort of motivated and learning and growing for the betterment of themselves, their teams, and their organization.
And we're right at that intersection that feels so uncomfortable. Like we're all doing a little bit of AI sense making and trying to figure out what it means for us. There's a little bit of or maybe a lot bit of an identity crisis going on. I talk to a lot of people in computer programming and who love writing the lines of code. I talk to a lot of writers who love writing the lines of words. And the shift that's happening is one from creating, and there will always be room for the artisans, right? Like I wrote this article about the advent of putting a phone in everybody's pocket with the iPhone and how that gutted out the middle of the photography business. Well, Annie Leibovitz isn't worried, right? Like there's always room for the artisans. And so either you're an artisan or you were somebody who is maybe struggling a little bit and now AI is this boost. I think what history shows is that it's the middle that tends to get gutted. And for those people in the middle, I would encourage you to think about that notion of if the task shifts from doing the thing to building, monitoring, or maintaining the thing, what's of interest to you? Do you want to build AI automations around writing? Would you want to maintain those guardrails so that AI doesn't drift around the writing? Would you want to monitor it? Would you want to maintain it? Would you want to fix it when it broke? And those are some of the skills that I would encourage, or things that I would encourage people to think about. And then I think there's a set of durable skills that still remains even after AI and the machines start rewiring some of the roles at a basic level.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that term, durable skills, because I think it's just so on point for the things that people need to focus on, and as opposed to technical skills or what some call soft skills. But you've really got to think about how do you.
Are you an HR or talent leader trying to figure out how to have the biggest impact on your business and your people? Listen, you're busier than ever, but you're also under more pressure than ever before. The We're Only Human podcast has been running for over 10 years, helping leaders get a handle on these topics. I'm Ben Eubanks, the host of the show, and I started my career as an HR practitioner and executive. Now I run a research firm dedicated to exploring the trends affecting work and the workplace. We cover research from a practical lens, technology changes, compelling case studies, and more, so that you can get back to work and have the impact you've always wanted to. And we do it with some fun. Check out the We're Only Human podcast today.
What is your role in this sort of human plus AI future, right? Because AI is not going away and it's only getting smarter. What do you want to do? What are you passionate about, and where do your skills take you to that sort of upper echelon or whatever it is that path is? Because AI is generally judged based on, can it do what the average, insert role here person can do? And it's not necessarily judged on, is it as smart as your best, subject matter expert or, the team lead level? It's more, can it do the average job? And is that good enough? I mean, unfortunately, some decision makers are going to say, well, once it reaches good enough, then I need to start thinking about what I'm going to do with the humans. But hopefully, as we were just talking about, hopefully they see it as an opportunity to redirect their energy and their expertise and their skills in other areas of potential growth, or just, higher value areas. Maybe that's, customer interaction. Maybe it's new, sales and business development opportunities, whatever it is. And so I think there's a lot that people need to think about. I also think one of the durable skills is systems thinking, as we've mentioned a couple of times now. And I think that's going to be incredibly helpful to have people that think that way as we think about redesigning and re-architecting work. And I know, you've been sort of in that, you've been thinking about that spec since, your DevOps and Agile, days. So I was curious to get your perspective about that sort of skill in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. It's thinking about the system, and there's so many systems within the system. And one of the things you touched on was really a career. And with the way organizations are structured in these functional areas, it made sense when they emerged, which was roughly around World War II. Right after World War II, organizations got bigger, they started to globalize. We had these functional silos emerge. I don't think that's I like to say you can't get 21st century results with a 20th century operating system. And so we've got to really be thinking about the system. How do we organize? My hypothesis is we start to organize around value streams. So that's concept to cash. The example I like to give is banking. If you're a bank, one of your value streams might be ultra high net worth individuals. Another one might be new graduates with specific financial needs. And so you put everybody who is servicing that value stream together to solve the problems. And when you think about some of the things that we've just touched on, which is adjacent competencies, which is following increasing flow, that makes so much more sense than something like a sales department, a marketing department. And I'm not saying that totally goes away, but I'm saying that functional organization, those start to become your people who dive in and help the value stream at strategic points. You're true experts in that area. What happens to the individual career at that point is it shifts from becoming a ladder into a portfolio. And as an individual, now you are chasing interesting projects and interesting initiatives more than career ladder of climbing up. The organization that's doing this really well is Unilever. And what they have is they used to have a program, they called it Flex. I think they've renamed it to UWork. And it's an AI matching engine that says you have this particular set of skills. The organization has this set of projects. Let's start matching you with these projects and give you the flexibility to chase intellectually stimulating initiatives and projects throughout the organization. And I could see that working really well because at a macro level, there's this other shift that's happening, which is people want more flexibility in their careers. And so it'll be interesting to see this play out over the next period of time as organizations shift, as individuals shift, and as like I say, the ladder melts into a network.
Yeah, I am really, really anxious to see that become more prevalent, both within an organization, especially a big one, and even just across the talent market, right? So we've made significant strides in the freelance, gig economy, and people can take on that type of project-based or fractional work. But, there's plenty of opportunity inside big organizations to be sort of an internal, gig worker and have that become a model, at least for certain types of people or roles. I'm not sure how to necessarily scope it, but I know from personal experience that it's possible. I mean, that's basically what I was doing at NBC for a couple of years. I mean, my title never changed, but I was working on different, projects and being moved around. Can you go help this team? Can you go help that team or whatever? The incentives, the performance management, the structure, the oversight of what I was doing wasn't necessarily, keeping up with the concept. So there's some maturation that's needed there, and some, culturally, I think you need to be able to figure that out. Not to mention understanding the finances, like which department is paying me. But those are things that can be worked out, or at least I assume that those things can be worked out. But I do think it's important for people to, have that level of agency and career mobility. I like to describe it as a lattice more than ladder. kind of career, even if you stay within, a big company, there's plenty of opportunity. Across my 22 years at IBM, I had at least 12 different roles in 7 or 8 different offices on the East Coast. So there's a lot of opportunity if you can unleash that, capacity and get, leadership to agree that these are the incentives and then not, hoard talent and realize that it's in the best interest of your employees and the organization at large to allow that level of flexibility.
Yeah, you've said the word incentives quite a few times, and I think that is part of the missing, that is a missing part of the equation. And, as someone who has been in leadership, man, there's something really cool about the way it's set up right now. The reward system is very attractive. And when you think about changing that, I think you have to think very deeply about what that means to the individual, because you might be challenging. When you start to challenge those incentives, you start to challenge security, lifestyle, image, identity. And there's a lot that gets wrapped up in that little word of incentives. And I think there are solutions. I don't think we've been, I shouldn't say that. I'm not that close to people who do incentives. So I don't know how much attention has been given there, but it does feel like that is a very important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Just really quickly, we just wanted to hit on one of the themes that we sort of touched on a little bit, but around like AI, governance and the broader category of what I call responsible AI. So, governance, ethics, transparency, and maybe trust is the first and foremost topic we should think about. So as you think about the hyperadaptive model and you think about, AI native, companies, like, are they also, is that one aspect of the framework that you get people to think about, that part of you managing not necessarily people, but agents and agentic workflows and things like that? Part of this is having the discernment and in some ways, the literacy to know, what is appropriate, that we should use AI where we should, not everywhere we can, and that type of literacy. How do you think about that in terms of your
Yeah,
methodology?
someone once asked me if I had a billboard in Times Square, what would I put on that billboard around AI? And I would put on there, with great power comes great responsibility. And I don't think there's enough attention being put to the implications of AI. I think it's the Wild West. I think currently the government is supporting the Wild West. They have their reasons for doing it. I am hopeful that there are other people in the world who are thinking more deeply about it to counterbalance some of the rogue behavior that's going on. I also am hopeful, and this is where I land the book, that we move beyond just profit, and that with these additional capabilities, we start paying attention to what's called the triple bottom line. So it's people, profit, and the planet, because now we have more capability. It's hard. It's hard to put your attention on more than one bottom line, and our systems aren't set up to do that. But maybe with AI, with the right focus, we can. And to your point about what happens to the jobs, I do think a number of jobs will go to monitoring the AI for ethical reasons, for compliance reasons. Like we just need to keep the humans in the loop.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that oversight role, I personally spent time learning what it takes to assess and audit some of the solutions in the space. I paid very close attention to who's actually being responsible by design. When I talk to solution providers, did they just whip up a new shiny object that seems to appear every hour of every day these days, or did they really put thought and care into how they collected their data, how they evaluated the models, and how they're sort of providing some layer of sort of trust and explainability to everything that they do, because I think that's going to make a difference. We've, in the absence of some of the legislation that we need and some of the sort of federal oversight, we've got to hold each other accountable. And I like to say we're all responsible for responsible AI. So I guess it's similar to your Times Square billboard. Yeah. So Melissa, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. We seem to be well aligned on so many aspects of this. So congratulations on the book. I know it's coming out soon. What's the publication date?
So the book is Hyperadaptive, Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native. It is being released 2 months to the day from today. So that would be May 13th of 2026. It is already available on most retail sites where you would buy books for pre-order. And if you do pre-order, then it unlocks bonuses that are interesting to those wanting to do this type of work.
Awesome. Excellent. I'm looking forward to it. Congratulations again. I will make sure that there's a link in the show notes to your website or whatever link you want to give me so people can check that out and also reach out to you for other types of support. So
thanks so much, Bob. Yeah, and if people want to reach out, I'm available on LinkedIn or hyperadaptive.solutions. Appreciate the shout out and appreciate you having me on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.